Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. Many times we don't do this, but we really should. It's something that sometimes we're afraid to do, or we have guilt. But on the other side of it, life is so much better. I'm talking about boundaries, setting boundaries in our lives. Why do we want to do it? How do we do it? I'm going to talk with somebody who's got a lot of insight on that. She is amazing in terms of psychology and the sessions that she offers people to realize these things, move their lives forward. She's also got some wonderful books. And I'm thinking back, maybe Boundaries is in one of those books. It's in the other room. Is it? It is, right?
It's in Love Yourself, Love Your Life, that create healthy relationships.
And yes. There you go. Dr. Ann Creekmore is back with us. How are you?
Good, Steve. How are you?
Terrific. So how do you define boundaries?
Well, I'll do the psychologist thing, Steve, as I do, right? Well, how do you define boundaries?
Why do I ask any questions? Because you answer them with a question.
Well, because you're just so good.
Yeah, Steve. Well, you're good at what you're doing as a psychologist. So boundaries are things you put in place to protect yourself and your values.
Excellent. I like that definition.
Okay. It's coming from experience. And a boundary is something that you put in place so that others can't infringe on whatever it is you're protecting, whether it's your personal space, situation, your mental capacity, all of that.
Your feelings.
All right. I'm going to ask you a question. You can't answer it with a question. Give an example of a boundary.
Well, I guess a boundary that comes to my mind is someone who's, maybe if you're with someone that you feel is being insensitive to you, or maybe like verbally aggressive or mentally aggressive or emotionally that you feel hurt by. And you don't feel it's treating you respectfully.
I remember let me clarify that. I was going to say the last time I put up a boundary, but it was it was a moment that I needed the boundary. But I believe we're continually, if you're in the mindset of doing it, we continually put up boundaries. Maybe it's little ones, and then there's the core boundaries. My core is, and this is, I took some time in between meetings late in the day over the spring, and I'm just sitting somewhere outside, loving the peace. I'm in my car. I'm having dinner. I had a meeting coming up, so it's just the breeze coming in. This just feels good. And then the phone rings, and I knew who it was, and I knew what to expect. Love them, but they have stuff always going on, as we all do. But they call me to dump, and I picked up the phone. They would have had to do, but it was that moment that I said, I'm not doing that anymore. That's going to be a boundary. When I'm setting time for myself, unless it's an emergency, and it's clear that it is, I'm just not going to give my attention to something else. I'm giving my attention to me. So I feel I put a boundary up there on that day, and I'll never forget it.
Great. So did you pick up the phone, or and say anything that, you were busy or did you just decide you're just not going to pick it up right at that time because you were busy? You were doing your self-care and I
picked up the phone, and this gets us to the next point, out of guilt, because I felt they needed me at that time. Again, I knew what to expect.
That guilt, because I want to include a little something on that.
Yes.
So say you had your two questions about guilt that you can answer, whether it's good guilt or bad guilt. It's a way of assessing whether this is something you should do, or it's just bad guilt you need to release. The two questions are, you could have asked yourself, is that, am I breaking a promise? Like if you don't pick up the phone when somebody calls you, are you breaking a promise?
Good point.
Yeah,
It wasn't breaking a promise. It was just a standard phone call.
Yeah, it's taking a phone call. So you're not breaking a promise. The other thing is, are you going against your value system, doing something unethical or criminal if you don't pick up the phone then?
No.
No. Okay. So then then it's bad guilt. It's like good guilt pricks your conscience, you do something like, break your word or promise or do something criminal, or, you think of steal something, you don't do those. But if there's nothing you're breaking your word about, promise, or you're not, doing anything unethical, in fact, in a way, then it's bad guilt, and you just say, hey, I'm releasing it. And
Wow.
so, yeah. So that's a way, like, you can kind of review whenever you're faced with something like, and then you start feeling guilty. And if it's not bad guilt, you just have to say, go, I'm releasing that.
Wow. Okay. So I never even thought of good guilt and bad guilt. And I guess it would be, bad guilt, because it just, I felt that they're calling, they want to vent, they need me for something. That phone call is like the last one weeks before, the one before that. And again, nothing bad. It's just at that moment,
right?
That's the time I carved for myself. And I went against that by answering that phone. I could have let it go. I could have texted them. It was just like, let me get this over with. Well, all right. So now, 25 minutes later, I've already eaten into my time to eat and have peace before I had to go to another meeting. But yeah, thank you for breaking the guilt thing down.
Yeah, because it's really, in a way, when you ask, does this go against my value system? It does, in a way, because it's your value system for your own self-care. You're kind of, so you have to set the limit, the boundary against your own guilt, your inappropriate guilt.
What are some of the other reasons why we don't set boundaries when we should, or when we know that we should?
Well, I mean, I can think of some that be like, like you mentioned, it's like you're kind of afraid, about it. Maybe you put inappropriate guilt on yourself, shouldn't on yourself, as they say. Or that you feel like maybe this would affect your relationship. Like if you don't do what they want, you're kind of codependent. You don't overfunction for this person in a sense, then something bad will happen to them, or something bad will happen to you, or something bad, will happen to the relationship. Fear, I think, are some reasons that we don't set the boundary. Afraid. Mm-hmm.
Wow. There's so many reasons why we're not doing it, but I think deep down inside, we know we should be doing it, but we're afraid to confront that.
Right.
And it comes in all different shapes and sizes when it comes to boundaries. You could set them anywhere, right?
Exactly. And you don't, like you said, you don't even really have to, set a boundary directly with the person. It's more like your own boundaries. It's like, oh, I'm having a safe space for me to be at inner peace. And then, so you just do what fits for that. You don't pick up the phone. You don't get up and do something different. You do what you've decided you're going to do for your care. And you
100%.
don't tell the person anything, it's not setting it on them. It's just you setting the boundary for yourself to take care of you.
As we're talking about this, Anne, I'm thinking that maybe it might be productive, impactful to write down what your boundaries are.
I think that's excellent. In fact, before I forget, I just want to say one thing that to correct a little something I just said. I just had a client who didn't talk to her grandmother, who was kind of her parent guardian, in a different place for about 4 days. She decided she was taking time for herself, which is great, a boundary. But she just blocked her, and she didn't even know, the other person didn't know. So I'm not saying to block somebody and they don't know, but if you, it's going to be like a short thing. You can just set the boundary and not pick up that moment. But if it's going to be 4 days, you might want to let them know, hey, I'm going to be in this vacation in my mind and taking care of these things. And sure. I won't be answering. So that's just so that it came to my mind. Sometimes it's good to tell people what you're doing, but not a small thing like yours. You don't have to say anything.
Are boundaries different for different people?
Absolutely, yes. And I apologize because you asked a good question and I don't remember what we were saying a minute ago.
No, we were just talking about different types of boundaries, but I'm looking at, we're talking about writing them down so it's clear in your mind.
Yes. And I was going to bring up, like, there are groups for people, especially people that have had, dysfunction in their family of origin, which is most people probably at some type. They, may become codependent, they're pleasers, and they try to, constantly, respond and do what the other person wants in a way, or overfunction to keep peace or stability. There's coda groups. There are codependent anonymous groups. Some of those 12-step groups, like Alcoholic Anonymous or Al-Anon or so on, Overeaters Anonymous. Well, there's the Codependent Anonymous, and they actually have handbook, like the big book in AA, that has all these rights in it. It talks about what your rights are as a person, and that kind of can be a guide. I'm sure you can just look it up online practically, or you could order it or something, but it gives you kind of, these are all your rights, these are your boundaries, what you would do if you're being healthy and assertive with people, what you can feel comfortable feeling it's okay to have a boundary around.
It's funny when you start thinking about it, because boundaries are one thing, but it all goes back to your values. Like for me, honesty is important, and if I detect that somebody's not being honest, or they're kind of skirting something, right away I'm like, red light goes off. All right. And if it continues, you've got to put a boundary up there. I'm not going to accept it. Same thing with money. Money's a big one. People need to borrow some money. You want to help them out, but you got to put up a boundary.
Right. You have to think about your rights and your needs. You have a right to pay your own bills, right? It's good to help people, but you got to think about taking care of yourself first and paying your own bills first.
What do you do if somebody is uncomfortable with your boundary? So let's say you tell them, let's say they call you at all times, and you say, I just need a moment to myself, and you're being, honest and upfront about it. And when they turn around and say, but I need, I need to talk right now. How do you get around that?
Right. Well, what have you tried that's worked? And I think you're thinking of something specific in a way too, right?
I'm just giving a hypothetical situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about something to precede that a little bit before I that. One thing is that, we all have triggers, different things that have happened to us. And then when something happens in our life, it kind of resembles that, it can trigger this past pain. And, so like John Gray said that he's a big couples therapist, the one who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, that people are often 90% reacting to something that's not even there. They're reacting to some past pain they're reminded of. And so the first step, I think, is to go within and see if you aren't being triggered. Just say, like, what am I feeling? What emotions? Am I feeling abandoned? Am I feeling sad? Abandoned is a thought, but sad or lost or whatever. And then when you go ask yourself, when have I felt this way before? This reminds me, say, of Dad. And it's like, did this person really do something to abandon me right this minute? I mean, if they say, for example, putting it on the other side of your example, say that person is feeling abandoned by you. If you say that you're in the middle of something and you'll call them back, are you abandoning that person? No. But it may feel that way because if their father never talked to them or whatever, if that's the wound, for example,
sure,
then they're going to feel that. And so you don't have to take responsibility for somebody else's wounds and just cater to them. But so the idea is, so for you as well, when you're feeling sensitive to something, to ask yourself, wait a minute, is this something that, is my boundary being infringed on, or am I just getting, into my past, bringing my past into my present and feeling that the same thing's happening? It's not even happening. Because it could be just your sensitivity, your wound got touched, versus it actually being something you have to set a limit about. And
I think it's also the way you deliver your boundary. Like, for example,
exactly.
I'm not going to answer my phone after 10 p.m. That's upset,
Yeah,
it's my time, going to go to bed. But if you deliver it to somebody else and say, you can't call me at 10 p.m. Now, excuse me, it's more of if you're trying to control that person as opposed to saying, this is the way it is for everybody. I don't answer my phone after 10 p.m., just the way it is.
Right.
I think it's the way you deliver it, how you tell the other person.
Exactly. And you can also say, like, look, I mean, if you truly have an emergency, I want to know. I mean, call back 2 or 3 times in a row. I'll hear your name called out. I'll get that it's an emergency.
Sure.
But that, it's just like I go to bed, I have to have a certain amount of downtime before I won't sleep, and I got to sleep to function. So I don't take them after 10 because that's when I'm doing my downtime to fall asleep. And sometimes if you explain your feelings and needs, the other person will be more likely to say, I'm torn, I would love to talk with you, and I certainly want to be available if there's an emergency. So you can call back a few times. I'll know, oh, that's a signal, I got to call you back. But otherwise, it's me taking care of me and being able to sleep at night. Sometimes if you're real authentic and you share about yourself and your feelings and your needs, if the person is a caring person
Sure.
and cares about you, they'll get it. And they can share theirs as well. They might say, hey, this is 10 o'clock, it's the only time of night I have to call anybody. I'm busy, all the time. It's like, well, let's win-win. How can we figure this out? Let's get together on Saturdays when we're not working and sleeping, It just, being authentic and trying to find some win-win that works for people as well.
For sure. And if that person doesn't respect your boundaries, it's something to think about. You might want to reevaluate your relationship with them.
Right. Exactly.
So this is in your book, Love Yourself, Love Your Life, right?
Correct. It would be under the Create Healthy Relationships. And kind of figuring out if people are repeatedly, just respectful to you. Is it your triggers? Sharing, can you win-win or not? And if not, then you personally set the boundary. You don't have to pick up the phone at 10, even, if you didn't tell them, you can tell them another time. It's
for sure.
It's you having your list. I love it. And I think the codependence list of rights, codependence anonymous list of rights is something that would be great for people to have. Just look it up and you'll have your list already done for you.
I truly think
good boundaries.
The starting point is writing it down so it's clear in front of you.
Exactly.
Because many times we bend, and you shouldn't, unless there's a reason and you're okay with it.
Sure. It's always flexibility.
Yeah. How do we find you, Ann? If somebody wants to have a session, learn more, even find out about the books?
Yes. The easiest way is probably go online to Psychology Today. Has all the different psychologists, and you can just put my name in, Ann with an E, Creekmore, spelled like it sounds, Creekmore, M-O-R-E. And I have my link right under my name, and you just click it. It'll go to my website with all my phone numbers and emails and so on.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I've said it before, the book, and you have a few, but that one in particular, Love Yourself, Love Your Life, it's really like your handbook for life.
I make it that way, right?
Yeah.
Just to have everything in it, from different schools of thought and different types of therapies in a little checklist form, so people can just use it for themselves for daily life.
User friendly. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ann Creekmore. I want you to know that you have the power to shine your light and be a magnificent, authentic person that you are in your mind, body, and spirit, and to have a wonderful, fulfilled life. I have written several books, but the one I'm sharing about is Love Yourself, Love Your Life. I want you to have that book so you can start healing the emotional wounds of the past and release any negative subconscious beliefs that are holding you back so you can become the whole, fulfilled, happy person you're meant to be. Please feel free to contact me. You can find me on Psychology Today, which links into my website. Thank you. Blessings and love.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, that's rad. It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, totally, just shorter. As in, I totes love going to the mall with Becca. Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous, as in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.